Welcome to this episode of Turning Grief into Growth, the Journey of Transformation. This is a podcast that's hosted by Greg Jacobs and Don Lipstein. Well, good morning, Don. Man, you're not going to believe this. It is, what is it, July 23rd when we're recording this. I know it'll drop at a later date, but it's 56 degrees in Kentucky right now. So it's, I woke up, I had my fan in my window last night, and I was like, I'm in Michigan. This is Michigan weather, but it's beautiful.
56 degrees. How is that even possible?
Well, we had this huge storm front come through and it blew out all the god awful humidity that was just drenching. And I kept seeing it on the forecast and I just kept waiting and anticipating for it, thinking, they get the weather wrong so much. Maybe this will happen, or maybe it won't. But it did. It happened. And man, I've got all the windows open in the house and airing it out, and it's beautiful out. How are you today, Don?
I'm doing well. It's 84 degrees here, which
Hmm.
it has not gotten out of the 80s probably for the past month. It's just
Yeah.
been floating between 80 and 89. And it's great. So I'm loving
Hmm.
life.
It's going to be 100 heat index, I think, in a few days here. So it's going back up. Well, Don, we've got a special guest with us today, Sharon Strouse. We're excited about. I'm going to go ahead and kind of turn it over to you to introduce her to us.
All right. Well, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to introduce Sharon. She is an author. She wrote a book called Artful Grief, and she's also an art therapist and has been for many, many years. I had the good fortune to meet her at a TAPS Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors event, and she was facilitating a workshop that I think she called it an open studio, uh, but she just welcomed people in at any time during the conference. And I walked in thinking I was just going to look and see, walk around and look and see, um, and she invited me to sit down, and I said, no, that's okay. I'm just going to walk around. And so as I'm walking around, she's putting magazines and scissors and pens and everything in this one empty seat. And she said, why don't you just take a seat and you can, listen, you don't have to do anything. I was very reluctant. She was very persistent. And I'm grateful for that because one of the things that she did for me, and I want to paraphrase Maya Angelou, a quote from Maya Angelou, people won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Mm.
And Sharon at that moment made me feel very safe and understood. And it helped me to really dig deep into my grief.
Mm.
And that whole experience, I sat down and made a collage. Um, and it was one of the most healing experiences of my grief journey,
Mm.
honestly. And I will always remember that. Um, so I, I just want to say I'm grateful that that turned into what I consider us to be very good friends, somebody that I look to for guidance from time to time, and I know that she's got this huge heart. So welcome, Sharon.
Oh,
Um,
thank you, Don. Thank you so much. And Greg, thank you too for, inviting me to share this time with you, this space, and really to share my story. So it's true that Don and I met at TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, where I was facilitating as an art therapist and a bereaved mom, an open art studio where it's different than a workshop, a straight out art making workshop. It was art therapy with that intention, but a studio space that was open for the entire time of the conference. So, people could come and go from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5. And many times we had people in there for the entire time creating and making and exploring in a creative way their loss, their trauma, their feelings. So just to back up a little bit, how did I get there, right? How did that happen? So I lost my daughter Kristin to suicide in 2001. She was 17, and she was beautiful and talented and funny. She was an artist. So, just to feel into my daughter as the artist and mom as the art therapist and what I now offer others. She was a freshman at Parsons School of Design when she died. Had been taking art lessons since she was 5, very, very into her art making. And she died in October 11th of 2001, which was 1 month after 9/11, actually, in New York City. And she was actually considered by the Red Cross a casualty of 9/11. So many people took their own lives in New York just because of the energy of the trauma of the Twin Towers falling and what it felt like in the city. So I think that definitely contributed to her death. But I believe she was misdiagnosed bipolar illness. She was being treated for depression, and that none of that fit. And it was really a sudden onset of her mental illness that began in January of her senior year, and she died in October. So it was quite traumatic, rather unexpected. And I gravitated towards traditional therapy in that first year and did a lot of talk therapy. And in December of the following year, she had been gone a year, I remember having this just hopeless, helpless experience, standing in my kitchen and turning out the lights and saying, "Oh my God, help me."
Mm.
And this little voice inside my head said, "Well, why don't you make a collage?" It's like so random. I feel like that voice was probably Kristin's. The thing is, I actually went and did that. I got some paper. There were magazines sitting on the counter. I got a glue stick, got some scissors, and I stood in the kitchen and I made this collage on a piece of poster board that was like 15 by 20. So it was pretty big. But I finished it that night and I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, there it is. And I could feel myself breathe. And I slept for the first time in a year.
Wow.
I was like, yes. And I was an art therapist, right? But you only really learn through your own experience. And so that opened the door to creating for me, in which I poured myself and the trauma onto paper for years, exploring. She fell from the 15th story of her dorm. That is a very traumatic image that needed to be worked with. And that's not anything that one feels comfortable talking about, and everything else that goes with it. And this is the beauty of art therapy, especially collage. And this is something that I do offer in the studio and with most newly bereaved, because I'm sure, Don, you remember, because I said this to you, everybody can open a magazine, right? Everybody can open a magazine and have some kind of response to an image, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. And most often, it's the negative response to an image that's calling you there. That's where the work is. So I did that for years because that is the only thing that made sense. As bereaved dads, you realize the outer world doesn't make sense. Your inner world doesn't make sense. So you can explore the narrative, the lost narrative in collage making, but you can also explore the question of who am I?
You
Who am
know,
I now? Yeah.
Sharon, there's so many things you've said that I just feel like dropping the mic and saying, okay, that's it. I mean, it's so powerful.
Well, it is. Art making is very powerful.
So, what would you say to people? So, my dad was an artist, and I always said I didn't get that gene. However, I'm an author, so I think that in some ways I very much did get that gene. I just put it down on paper when I type. So we were talking offline before we hit record, and for those on YouTube, right above my head is a paint by numbers of, basically two Adirondack chairs on a lake up in Michigan with a sand dune in the background. I painted that paint by numbers the first year David died. It was probably one of the most therapeutic things.
Right.
People could mock it and say, "Oh, it's a paint by numbers," which is way harder than it appears, by the way. But it was so therapeutic to me, and I thought, "Who
Right.
am I to pick this thing up at Hobby Lobby and paint this? I'm not an artist."
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that you did a lot of talk therapy. Definitely space for that. Definitely
Right.
encouraging
Yes.
that. Peer
Yeah.
groups, everything. But what would you say to people that say, "Well, I'm not an artist. I don't, I've never dabbled in that before."
Hmm. Well, most people that come
Yeah,
into the
Don, he's
studio,
one.
like Don, like Don, he tried to dance around it, and you just kind of the room was filled with people that were sitting at the tables and talking and creating. And as I said, everybody could open a magazine. And that's the point. You do not have to be an artist. You simply have to be willing and curious and present. And that's it.
Mm.
And the invitation, as Don said, it was a safe place, a safe environment, and you can feel it when you walked in. That people were diving deep into their trauma narrative, exploring themselves. But there was a sense of being held and seen that was palpable in the studio, and that happens when people come together and create. But to your point about painting with numbers, there has been a lot of research. This is the same thing as adults who use coloring books, that your nervous system begins to settle. It's a place where you focus, you come into your body, you're in the present, and there's a lot. Your heart rate drops. It's great for people who are anxious,
Mm.
to help them to come into a healing, quieter space. So there's enormous benefit to that. The difference is between doing a painting by numbers and collage is that collage opens the door to the unconscious. So whatever is wanting to come through you, like what are the elements that I dealt with in terms of Kristin falling? What did that feel like?
So it
What
doesn't
was
have
the
to be
sense?
organized necessarily. It's just
No,
whatever comes out as a
it's
collage.
not organized, and
Yep.
that also is the point. You are actually dealing with bits and pieces of paper, and so in essence, you're dealing with what's fragmented, your fragmented self, your fragmented story. But what happens over time, and I really encourage those who I work with to do this outside of the therapy room or outside of the studio room, that you receive enormous benefit for doing it as a practice. And you begin to see over time that there is change. The narrative begins to change as Ted Reinierson reminds us, in his model of restorative retelling. If we work in the trauma narrative of what happened, over time you may see that you actually place yourself into the narrative so that you're not a witness, but a participant in the story. That changes everything. I didn't know any of that kind of theory when I was creating. I did it intuitively, and that's the power of it. So I'm also, when I'm working with people, I'm not saying, oh, Don, come on in. Let's go right to the event. What was that all about? No, no, no,
No,
no.
and if I may, I want
Yes.
to share my experience because I think it speaks to what you are referring to. I sat down, there were magazines in front of me, scissors, glue. I start just cutting things
Yep.
out of the magazine. I had no idea why.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah.
like, there was
Yes.
something about that. I thought, let me cut this out. And so I'm cutting it out. Then I decide I'm going to start gluing things onto the paper or onto the poster board. But I'm doing that, and then I see other things. And before I know it, I have the whole thing full without having any clue what I'm doing. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Sharon says, tell me about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at it, and this story starts to come into my body, into my head, into my heart. And it was like, oh my God, like I created this and without really knowing what I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a story behind it.
Right.
And I could read and understand that story, which
Right.
was incredible,
Right.
incredible.
And as we know, early on, the story is fragmented. It has no language. Severe trauma has no language. And so that's why art making and image making is powerful. It comes up out of your body. The story and narrative that you're holding on a cellular level is released, and you begin over time to be able to organize it. So um, early trauma survivors often have images that are very disorganized and fragmented. And over time, if they stick with it, they see a certain level of organization so that maybe they have 100 images, small little images and words all put together. And 3 years later, they may create a collage that has 3 images in it
Hmm.
that's highly organized and makes sense.
It's really interesting to me because I had two sons, or have two sons. My son David passed away December 23rd, 2020, as all of you know that listen to this podcast, in an auto accident. And then my other son, Nathan, is getting ready to turn 26 next month. And he lives with us, lives down in a separate apartment in the basement, but he had painted this picture
Ah,
of two spiders on a flower, and he's got all his art stuff there. And it was just something that he did last week, and texted out to the family on the group chat. And I was like, "Oh, very cool painting. That's neat," and just went on. And I don't think until listening to this, he deals a lot with anxiety, and has really been working through that and doing really well. But I don't think until listening to this, I realized, man, that's therapy for him. It's not a
that
paint
is
by
therapy.
numbers. It was just
No.
something that this is his
Mhm.
way of expressing. And
Right.
he's done a lot of that through the years, a lot of different little paintings. And he's like, when he's really anxious, he's milling around in my garage. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm trying to find some wood. I need to build something. And
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah,
his
this is art
creative way.
therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
And paint is very fluid. How different is paint from paper?
Yeah.
Really fluid. And, so if I was looking at that painting with him, I'd say, tell me about it. Interesting that they're what, two little bugs.
Yeah.
I'd also be looking at the color. Tell me about the color palette. It looks like, are those bugs on, a spider web? Tell me about the web. We're seeing a close up. All of that has meaning, how. So I'd keep going on with that. And it's interesting too, over the years of creating collages. I did separate collages, but then I started creating into books that are called altered books, where you use an old book and you create into the pages. And that served me for a long time as a container for the work. But then I also have explored doll making and, creating into little boxes or um, healing sticks. And about 2 years ago, I went to Australia and came back, and I don't know why, but I was compelled to begin painting, and I'd never painted before. And I think part of that was a resistance to painting because Kristin was a painter.
Mm,
And I felt like, who am I to pick up one of her paintbrushes and use her paint? Like, do I
yeah.
dare? And so it was kind of a trip that became initiation and opened a door for me. And so I have been painting, and there's something very wonderful about just the property of paint. Its looseness, its lack of control, unless you're painting by numbers. I'm doing abstract painting and finding that I love the abstractness of it as a counterpoint to the reality of what you find in paper and magazines. It's like two opposite ends of a spectrum.
So let's talk, let's just drill down on that a little bit.
Yeah,
So when you look at life, there's chaos in life. It's
yeah.
not all tidy. It's not all orderly. I was texting my brother-in-law this morning and his house burned down last
Oh
year and he's in a
gosh.
rental
Oh,
house and he's
wow.
having his wife is a school teacher and they're getting ready to, she's getting ready to go back to school and then their house was rebuilt so now they have to pack everything up in the rental house. I have to go. I was like, man,
Mm, mm.
I wish life was full of order, but
No,
there's order and chaos amongst the sunshine and the storms.
yeah.
So with the abstract aspect of what you're talking about with the collage, it's really a matter of just let it come out, let it flow, let it
Let it
show
come
up.
out.
Yeah.
Yes. One of my things that I say are there are no collage police coming.
Mm.
I'm sorry also to tell you that your pieces probably are not going to museums. So yes, this is a very honest visual of my internal life. And part of my studio setup was bringing my own original artwork early and middle and later. So people introduce them to this studio setting. They only needed to look at the images and go, "Oh, got it,
Mm.
got it. Look at she went right there, down, down, down into the depths of it. Nothing left unsaid and or explored. Her body, blood, all of it was right there. All things that are very difficult to talk about. Making the images allowed me to talk about it and allowed me to write the book. So it's interesting that I worked in the realm of image making that released me and allowed me over time to go to the other places. Um, and I'm loving painting in the abstract because I feel like I'm working in the energetic field of the narrative, whatever the narrative may be. The narrative isn't 25 years later, isn't Kristin. It's in the complexity of life that continues to live itself. And I have this amazing tool to explore that. And I have an amazing tool to explore my happiness. So it's not only darkness. When we have a loss, certainly at the beginning it is, but over time, you're exploring the fullness and the richness of your life. Um,
You know, this art stuff brings to mind when I was 5 years old. Um, and I think this is part of the reason why I feel like I'm not an artist, but I was 5 years old and I was making uh, puzzles for my siblings for
mm,
Christmas. And I had drawn some things and then cut this on cardboard. I cut the
mhm,
cardboard out and I thought doing something very creative. My father comes by and he sees what I'm doing he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm making gifts for, my siblings." And
Yeah.
he
So
says,
sweet.
he goes, "Come with me." And he takes me to the store and he hands me some money. And he says, "You can buy your siblings some
Oh,
gifts." And
that
I know
shuts you
that
down.
it shut me down. It
Yeah.
shut me down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
um,
explains what's wrong with you, Don. Now I
that
understand.
that's
That's what happened.
but it's like I love the thought. First, my brother and sister are extremely artistic. They're like super. My brother can do a painting of somebody like somebody's head um, in an hour. Like he
Mm,
and he captures it like really
mm,
quick. And I'm
mhm.
like, how in the world? Um, but it's something that I want to continue to explore. And your that time that I spent in the studio was like it was just absolutely um mind shifting for me. And because art can be many different forms that I never even thought
Yeah.
about. And, I'm a cook. I love to cook, and that's art.
That's an art form. It
It
definitely
is.
is. Yeah.
It is.
Photography. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm, mhm.
So, it comes out in me, but I want to explore painting.
Yeah.
Me too.
It's been
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been something that I want to try, and this conversation might get me to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to be in the not knowing, and you have to be willing to just push the pain around and explore. I'm not at 75. I don't know if I can become a representational artist and, paint anything that looks like anything. So I'm just like, I'm not even going to go there. But I've loved the world of abstract painting and how it relates to my life. And what am I saying when I pick out two or three colors and I pour that paint onto the canvas and I look at it and I'm looking at how it relates to each other, how the colors blend. And and then part of the process that I'm doing and exploring is that's the background narrative, whatever it may be. And I allow that. But then I say to myself, I intentionally want to bring light into that narrative. So, what is that about? And how do I do that? With stencils, with light, with overlays, with dotting, with circles and patterns. And so, with the intention of bringing light into the narrative, that changes. And of course, that is connected theoretically to some of the models within the field of grief and bereavement. And if you think about it, if you've already created a canvas that is happy and you intentionally add even more light to that, we're talking about energetic fields that becomes even more highly illuminated. So I have to say, in those places of painting, there's a level of joy and happiness that is um, very awe. I feel like I'm awestruck.
Sharon, let me,
So a lot of healing, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
let's drill down on that just a little bit, if that's okay.
Yes.
I'm going to go to a place that's uncomfortable. I
Sure.
don't think that I'm going to make you uncomfortable. This might be a little uncomfortable for our listeners. And Don and I are very careful with, we've used the word triggers, activation of emotions, things like this. So
Mhm.
you had made a quote. You said it's not all darkness, quote unquote. It's about exploring fullness and richness of life.
Mhm.
You had also said, and this is where I'm going to kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole because I think this is
Okay.
important for our listeners to hear. You had said that Kristin had jumped from her 15th story
Right.
dorm room. You had also said sometimes you're painting going down and sometimes there's blood. Um, my son died in a mangled car accident.
Mhm.
And it's weird because there's so many people out there just don't understand the fact of triggers or activation of emotions.
Yes.
Every
Yes.
once in a while, I'll get a bystander. Friend of mine I'm friends with on Facebook will be driving by an accident scene. And it's like, oh man, there was a fatality. And they take a picture of it and they post it on
Yeah.
Facebook.
Oh, yes.
And I'm
So
thinking, hey,
triggering.
moron, do you think their family wants to see this before or period? And it just really triggers me. So, in order to get to that last quote you said about exploring fullness and richness of life, and then before that you said it's not all about darkness, you almost have to deal with the darkness first, don't
Yeah,
you? As
you
far as,
do. Yeah.
this is a trigger, this is an activation, this is what I like to call roadblock. You have to sometimes park the car, get out, move the roadblock in order to go through it.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about that, kind of in sequence or in order to get to the vibrance and the joy and the healing you were talking about.
Right. Right.
That makes sense.
So early, yeah, no, it makes total sense. Early on, it was totally about the trauma, and it was about her fall
Mm,
and all that I held in my imagination around that. And so many of my collages dealt with my imagined what was her body like, imagining her falling, and my sense was I had the same experience falling with her. Now, those are feeling states, and they're very, I'm able to talk about it here, but I didn't really have much language for that, but I could explore that in collages. Lots of the images are upside down. The other thing in
mm,
terms of, right,
yeah.
so repeated images upside down. So I'm exploring that. So the process would be I see an image in a magazine. I have a memory or a sensation. I'm cutting that out. I'm deciding to put it upside down. All of that is moving through me at the same time. Then I'm I'm in some kind of creative parallel experience of it's right brain, left brain. Where am I going to place that on the collage? Oh, it should go here. Oh, this is now balanced. Wait, let me have this color moving into this color. So do you see your brain is going back and forth? It's almost like an EMDR kind of thing.
Mm,
Um, so you're not totally in the narrative, but I explored that for years until it didn't present itself as something to be explored. The other thing that happens when you're working in artwork is you can approach something that is very difficult in a symbolic way. So I began to consider the idea of the condition of her body. Obviously, blood would be involved there. I wasn't able to go into that. I had to give myself some distance, and I put a lot of red flowers
mm,
in the work.
Mm.
As I began to then approach the notion of that in a gentle way that I could be with it until I saw some ads that were nail polish. And I looked at those and I was like, yeah, that really works well. And
mm,
could cut that out and let it be more blood-like. So that I wasn't like overlaying it, making it nice. And then over time, I didn't need to look at that or see that. It became flowers again. And then over time, I don't need red in my images at all. It becomes something else, maybe white flowers, maybe no flowers. It changes over time, but creating gives you a mechanism to be with the horror of it. Without coming to the page and saying, oh, today I'm going to work on this edge. No, you just show up at the table with the magazines and the scissors and the glue and have the intention, I'm going to open myself to healing. And then the universe seems to give you whatever's really needed. You sit there and you open the magazine and you begin to look, and it shows you, and you tear it out and you begin to put it down and you organize it and you look at it and go, oh, okay, that's where I am today. And it does change over time.
Yeah, it does, because I've done it more than once.
Yeah.
And
Does that make
um,
sense?
Yeah.
Look, you seem to have a question.
well,
I don't have a question.
This
I'm
is
just
very
taking,
intense. It's very intense, and it really is very difficult to describe. These are feeling states, and to be able to sit down and actually create without a thought whatever is in the field that wants to be healed around your son's accident.
Mhm.
And the
it,
triggers and traumas that come to you around that.
I think it's a real good, I don't know if it's a metaphor, but grief, we turn, it's dark, it's very dark, and we turn it into light as we grow through our grief, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, you're, I think what you're describing is that turning grief into growth,
Hmm.
that, it changes
That'd be a
and
great
we
name of
get
a
to,
podcast, Don. We ought to think about that.
we should,
Actually,
but
it's the name of my second book.
Mm,
is it?
Artful Growth. I'm in the midst of writing that.
Uh,
nice.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah,
Well,
and it takes, Don, it takes time, as we
it
know.
does.
You're years into it. I would say 5 years is so new,
Yeah.
still so new compared to 25 years. I can remember thinking 5 years, you know, yes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
You
at
don't
10
know what you
years
don't know.
looking back to 5 years
Yeah.
and feeling so much has happened. And then I thought, oh, at 10 years, like you've done it, it's great. 15, there's something different. And 20 and 25, there's still something different.
Yeah. It doesn't go away. It
No,
changes.
no, it
And
changes.
and Sharon, with that, I mean, you've given us so much. This is a really great episode to just contemplate and think about. And I'm definitely going to explore my
Yes,
artistic
please
abilities.
do.
But could you what could you leave our listeners with, a nugget of wisdom that that you can leave with them?
Well, I think what you were saying is that it changes over time. And I think to embrace the foreverness of the journey, the deep weaving of this thread of our loved ones into the tapestry of our lives, that, Kristin is part of my narrative, but she's not the whole narrative. She has not overtaken my life, but has really become a co-creator in my life. And so, um, be willing and curious and
Mm.
open. Yeah,
I
that's,
love that.
yeah,
Co-creator, because Josh definitely he's part of my life,
yeah,
and he helps me to create, whatever it is that I'm creating. So
yeah, yeah. It's so important to continue that bond
Yeah.
with our loved ones. Yeah.
yeah,
I'll close with this. As you were talking, you said you look like you had a question on your face. I think it's just more in processing everything. It's such
Mhm.
powerful stuff. I was thinking about yesterday. My wife and I took my daughter Hannah to the airport. She went to Peru for a week on a mission trip.
Mm.
And I was fine up until we were putting her bag in the car, and I was like, "Come on, let's go. We're late. Let's go." And my wife is like, You're kind of on edge. You need to, you're being very aggressive. I know that you're scared. And I'm like, scared. I'm not scared." And
Mm.
last night I took a step back and I realized, man, I still am dealing with the aspect of losing another child,
Yes.
and her
I,
flying all the way to Peru. So I guess I would just say that our trauma is not just on the loss of our loved one. It is all encompassing that we deal with day in and day out with every other interaction in life that we have. And we have to learn how to cope with that, how to process. And, whether it's painting, whether it's doing collages, photography, Don, like you said, cooking, find an outlet. Because I do feel like that is absolutely part of the healing process. So,
Absolutely.
Sharon, thank you so much. This has been a treat
Yes.
and a privilege. You have been a huge asset to our listeners and to Don and I, especially personally. So thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you,
Thank
Sharon.
you. Thank you.
Until next time. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen. We hope turning grief into growth spoke to your heart and becomes a part of your own journey of healing and transformation. If you know someone who could use a little hope, please share this episode with them. And don't forget to follow, like, or subscribe on your favorite platform so you don't miss what's coming next. Don and I can't wait to share more conversations to help you keep turning your grief into growth. Until next time.